All right, everyone, there was so much glee and happiness, less than a week ago when they finally figured out that they had developed an effective treatment for Ebola. Now, it was billed as a cure, which it never is. That there's still a death rate of 6%, even under the best of circumstances, which is that a person very quickly gets this antimicrobial or antiviral compound within like the first few days of exposure before they're symptomatic. By the way, in the field, are you ever going to be able to deliver it to someone under those circumstances? Not commonly. Most of the time they'll be symptomatic, which means it has a death rate, Ebola does, of still 29% roughly with the injection of these materials. Now that's better than the 49% death rate that it normally has. If it's completely untreated, the death rate's more than 50-50. With topical symptomatic treatment, it's about 50-50. And with this administered under normal conditions, it's about a third. It's about 30%. That's good. But the problem is this. Treating someone after they've already gotten flu-like symptoms and been maybe wandering around for several days, or let alone if they've already begun hemorrhaging, doesn't necessarily solve for spreading the disease. It just means that the person who's already gotten it, already been infected, is less likely to die. That's great. It's definitely a step in the right direction. What you really need is a vaccine that works more of the time. But now it's in South Kivu, that is Ebola. It's moved to another province within the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and you've got several cases there, active, and I believe one death. That's a problem, because it's spreading geographically. The more it spreads geographically and the more centers it can affect at once, the more thinly applied your response is going to be. You're going to need more doctors. Well, there's a cap on the number of doctors available to go to these provinces in the middle of buttfuck nowhere and treat people. You've also got a declining number of doctors because they keep getting fucking killed, sometimes by their own medical staff. You have a discrete number of people who are potentially willing to volunteer under such conditions, because you also need people to put on the hazmat suit and just fucking carry the bodies around. The number of people willing to do that, I think, over time will decline as the death toll gets higher. The problem is this: even if you have a treatment available, you don't have an effective prevention. And that's really the problem. That means it can continue to spread. It just means that fewer people die once they get it. What happens if the number of cases inclines to the point where you run out of this treatment? What happens if the, what is it called, MZAP or whatever it is, runs out? Or it runs out, it's no longer easily obtained, you don't have enough of it. Well, that would be a problem. Basically, if you get Ebola and you don't get treatment at all, you've got a pretty good chance of dying. It's about 70%. If you get topical treatment, if you get the saline drip and the topical antimicrobial wash and aspirin and all of that stuff you get in an Ebola ward, it drops to about 50%. If you get MZAP under normal conditions, it drops to about 30%. That's considerably better than dying out in a field somewhere with a better than 50-50 chance of an agonizing death. Delivered properly, if the person's not even symptomatic yet, it lowers the death rate to lower than 10%. It makes the disease highly survivable. But it doesn't mean you can't spread it to another person. It doesn't mean that you can't... the average person who gets Ebola doesn't go to the ward the next day to get treatment. Another problem we've got, this has been a continuous problem, is that people don't trust the medical workers. So if someone has flu-like symptoms, they don't go to the Ebola ward until they start bleeding out of the eye sockets. Because they think, well, I'll probably die. Even if you tell them, hey, we've got a treatment now, they're still thinking, well, I'll probably die. Maybe the medical workers cause disease. They're killing us because of racist reasons. There are people that believe that. There are people in Central Africa that believe that the outside world coming with their plastic suits is coming to test bioweapons and weird shit like that. There are people in the West that believe that. Tend to overlap with the anti-vaxxers, I've noticed, and people who tell me that I should take shots of vinegar or colloidal silver. That'll cure AIDS, by the way, according to some of these people, so it's interesting. You got a problem of a population that by and large doesn't trust the medical workers or is terrified. They're engaged in guerrilla warfare in and around these regions. So if I go to an Ebola ward, let's say I'm there, I get sick. I'm a sitting duck if I go to the Ebola ward. They've been attacked before. They've been targeted deliberately. People go in, burn the ward to the ground. They're afraid of contagion, number one. You've got sectarian strife, number two. That can potentially cause them to go in. They're trying to take doctors hostage and steal medical equipment because it's worth a lot. They can sell it for guns and weapons. That's what it boils down to. This keeps happening over and over again. We are one disaster, one Ebola ward raid away from a major pandemic, and people don't want to admit it. They think that their future is in treating the disease topically after the person's already been sickened. That's not how you prevent the disease from spreading further. It's in a new geographic region now, with the capability to spread to more metropolitan regions. The more larger centers of commerce and travel it hits, the more it can spread then even further. Remember, the last time there was an Ebola epidemic, and the West African epidemic years ago, was around this time of year that it really started picking up. I don't know whether that's due to weather or what it is, and of course it's geographically. Liberia and Sierra Leone aren't the same as Central Congo. Central East Congo, rather. Sorry. That being said, though, it could take off at any given time. What could happen is that the epidemic worsens in multiple metropolitan regions of significant size. Beni, which is the smallest of the three, has 250,000 people. Butembo has about 5,600,000, somewhere around there. I question whether the census records are 100% accurate in parts of Central Africa. And then Goma has 1.2 million and is right up against another international border. It has an international airport that services regionally. Yeah, I'm sure you can get to Nairobi. I'm sure they probably fly to Cairo from there. Probably Abu Dhabi and all these other places are serviced by this airport. How many flights have been canceled? How many airlines refuse to go in and out until the epidemic is wiped out? Now we wait and see if there are more cases in Goma, because of course you had that first flush of cases. We got to wait possibly another week before we get the next one. Now we've got a treatment. It's wonderful to know that fewer people will die once they've gotten it. I'm not undercutting the value of having an effective Ebola treatment. That's wonderful. Now we need an effective vaccine, and we probably need to quarantine the affected area, but there's no attempt ongoing to do so, and it would be kind of pointless anyway when you think about it. You got an area where people are moving around and shooting at each other anyway, and had been before the Ebola epidemic even existed. Try convincing a group of dudes that wander around out in the dense underbrush with armored jeeps seeking to kill their enemies. Try to convince them, hey, there's disease around, so please stop fighting for the next few months because the doctors have to come through. Well, all you need is one person to refuse, and then the war keeps going, so it's going to be a little bit problematic. Unfortunately, now you have a new province, a totally new region that, as far as I know, has never had an Ebola outbreak before. Now it's taken hold. By the way, I wonder if it's capable of entering an animal reservoir from the human population. Like we talk about bushmeat, like chimp meat or bat meat, causing Ebola epidemics, causing outbreaks in human populations. But then I saw one piece of literature after the West Africa outbreak that claimed that it was possible that dogs might be a temporary reservoir for the virus. What happens if a population of feral dogs gets like topically infected? I mean, they don't have symptoms or something, but it's like on their fur or some shit. Someone pets the dog, a month later starts a whole new epidemic. Well, that's a problem. Humans love dogs. We've co-evolved for 10,000 years, so it might be difficult for them to give up the dog bushmeat, the ferals, the street meat, I guess. So they're not living out in the bush, they're living in the streets of some of these slums in the third world. Hell, you look at Detroit or Flint, and you got the same thing in the United States too, so, let's not be too judgmental, I suppose. We got the same problem. Got stray animal populations. Go down to southern Texas sometime. They've got a feral chicken population. Literally, I couldn't believe it when I went down there. I'm like, what the fuck is happening here? No, it's not really a funny subject, but, all you can do is laugh because the medical apparatus of the world forsook Central Africa for months. Let the problem get worse and worse, and now that it's a regional epidemic, now they get involved. Oh yeah, we go to treatment. Oh yeah, it's a big problem. It's an international emergency. It was an emergency when it hit Beni. That was many months ago. It didn't have to hit Butembo. It didn't have to hit Goma. You should have been responding then and said, okay, for the first time, a fairly major metropolitan region has Ebola cases. We need to step in now and quarantine the city, and we need to make sure that we snuff it out as quickly as possible. A lack of response allowed it to move to Butembo. And you still didn't declare it an international emergency. Oh yeah, it's only a city of 500,000-600,000 people. No big deal. Who fucking gives a shit? It's got a regional airport. It's got, highways and shit. Who cares? It won't go any further. We've got a handle on it, people. Don't worry. Oh, it's in Goma? Oh, yeah, now it's an emergency. Yeah, all you need is one person who's not yet symptomatic. They're in the street. They just happen to get coughed on by the one active Ebola case that's in the city. They get on the plane. They go to Nairobi. They get on the plane. Go to Cairo. They get on the plane. Go to Johannesburg or something. They start coughing and wheezing a few days later. They infect a bunch of people. They think they got the flu. Nobody gives a shit because there hasn't been a case in these places yet. There's no reason for people to be afraid. Then all of a sudden you have 50, 60 active Ebola cases explode all over Pretoria or explode all over the downtown Nairobi, Lagos in Nigeria. My God, you know the population density of some of these African cities? Do you know how many people live in Nairobi or Timbuktu and some of these places, especially in West Africa? Some of the biggest cities in the world are now in Africa. So, I mean, it's some people, they think of Africa and they think, oh, they think straw huts and small villages. No. There are mega cities, the likes of which you wouldn't believe in Africa. The real big problem is that most of the population of those cities is still dirt poor, so they don't have running water. If they do, it's not particularly well filtered. They don't necessarily have sewage access. Things are being built faster than infrastructure can be supplied. Even where centralized efforts are being made, like in Nigeria or something, to expand the infrastructure, growth is so massive they can't even service everybody. It'll take decades. If the population of Nairobi stopped growing today, it'd probably take them a decade to hook everyone up to the basics of plumbing. And that's assuming the massive centralized investment into bothering to do so. They'd rather just have little collective, like, public outhouses or something with a lamp on them. If you're lucky, you have running water at all in such a place. You know, most of the population doesn't, so it's a big problem. You've got unsanitary conditions, high population density, low overall local medical apparatus capabilities, and then you've got Ebola potentially entering the mix, in some cases in some of these cities for the first time. Big as Goma may be, it would be 10,000 times worse if it hit a place like Nairobi or Cairo. You know, a place with true international travel, a place with massive population density. That's about all. Peace out.